morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this extraordinary world of ours. I truly hope that you're safe, sound, and above all, healthy. I'm Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and welcome to Carnegie Connects, a series of conversations on issues of critical importance to America and to the world. Today, we're going to be focused on Gaza. It's been 2 months plus since phase one of the Trump plan began its implementation. For the most part, and I do say for the most part, the ceasefire, or at least the war as we've watched it over the last 2 years, seems to have come to an end. 20 living hostages have been freed. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or Hamas, holds one remaining Israeli. There are reports and backs and forth about violations of the ceasefire by both sides. And in the last 2 months, we've seen, I don't want to be too negative here because I wish there were a way to end the war, truly end the war in Gaza. We've seen a lot of motion, it seems to me, without real movement. You have the creation of a civil military coordination center, Kiryat Gat in Israel. You've had a CENTCOM conference in Doha on what to do about the International Stabilization Force. You've had invitations sent out to at least 70 countries and some interest, actually, for any number of reasons. You have meetings today, even as we speak in Miami, that may well be emblematic as how untethered some of these ideas may be to the realities on the ground in Gaza. You have high-level meetings, the first since October, since Sharm, among the Turks, the Qataris, the Americans, and the Egyptians. You have reports maybe of a International Stabilization Force conference in Washington in January. And although there's no confirmation, the Prime Minister of Israel is supposed to sit down with President Trump sometime by the end of the year in late January. The central question before us, I think, today is the Trump plan just stuck, or is it closed for the season? And as the title of the invitation of the panel suggested, is it phase one and we're done? And if it is still alive, how do you move into the difficult phase one, which was not easy to implement, to move through the plan and to truly end the war in Gaza in ways that normal humans would regard as the war actually being over, with better governance, better security, and prosperity, and perhaps even a pathway, if I could be so bold, toward a different Israeli-Palestinian future. As I mentioned offline to our panelists, Gaul may have been divided into three parts, but Gaza is increasingly divided, it seems to me, into two. Whether or not this is going to be the reality, Hamas and Israeli-controlled parts, is unclear to me. But for today, three questions present themselves. One, who or what is going to govern Gaza? Number two, who or what is going to maintain security in Gaza in all of its very complicated facets? And number three, who or what is going to deliver the kind of humanitarian assistance on a reliable, predictable basis? Access to potable water, shelter, sanitation, and to eliminate food insecurity. And then, of course, deal with the issue of reconstruction. Happily, I do not have to answer any of these questions, at least today, but I have three analysts, some with practitioner experience, actually, I think all with practitioner experience, who can, I think, guide us through this. Just quick intros. Marwan, Muasher, my colleague at Carnegie, is vice president for studies at Carnegie, where he oversees research in Washington and Beirut, from which he just returned, on the Middle East. Marwan served as foreign minister, 2002 to 2004, Jordan deputy prime minister, 2004 to 2005. And his career has spanned multi-dimensional areas of diplomacy, development, civil society, communications. Dr. Nimrod Novick, someone I've known for years, like Marwan, was the senior policy advisor and special envoy to the late Prime Minister Shimon Peres, and an advisor to the Israeli National Security Council. Nimrod is a member of the leadership of the Commanders for Israel Security, CIS, a distinguished fellow with the Israel Policy Forum, and a senior fellow with ECF, the Economic Cooperation Foundation. Manal Zeidan, whose reputation precedes her, is an intercultural communication specialist and an independent consultant who has worked in both advisory as well as executive roles in government, nonprofit, and private consultancies. She previously served as an advisor to the Prime Minister, the Director of International Relations at the Office of the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah for 6 years, 2007 to 2013, after which she worked as the Director of Advocacy and Outreach at Future for Palestine, a nonprofit organization. I should add, it's a good moment as we await the end of the year. We have a Jordanian, an Israeli, and a Palestinian all talking together in the same virtual. And I'm sure if they were in Washington, we would all be together on the same panel. That gives me some measure of hope. So let me start first to ask each of you, what is your sort of strategic theory of the case for the 20 points? What are these 20 points exactly? A peace plan, a plan to end the fighting, free the hostages, but not the war? What did the administration have in mind, and why did it articulate them? Marwan, let me start with you.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm glad to be with you and with Nimrod and Manal. I would not call it a peace plan to start with. I would call it a plan only for phase one. And let me start with the positive. I mean, it did result in a ceasefire, as fragile as it is, but it is still holding. It has resulted in the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, which is great. Beyond that, I see it as more ambition than strategy, Aaron. It doesn't really have a detailed plan on the very same questions that you have asked. Who is going to govern? Who is going to reconstruct Gaza? All of these are questions that are not yet answered, and there is no pathway to answer them. And so, we can discuss all of this, but I'm very skeptical about moving beyond phase one. I'm also skeptical whether the Israeli governing coalition wants to move beyond phase one. I mean, Netanyahu has indicated multiple times his reluctance to move beyond phase one. So that's also a question to be answered. There's an Arab reluctance to disarm Hamas or to get into a confrontation with Hamas. So who's going to do that? And the big question remains whether this is a peace plan or not. Is it going to lead to a pathway? I don't want to say more than this, at least a pathway towards Arab-Israeli peace. As it is, I have my strong doubts.
Yeah, sober and realistic, Marwan. I would have expected nothing else from you, but thanks. Manal, let me turn to you now. How do you, as an analyst, see this? We'll get into how Palestinians might view it. But what do you make of it? You've been around peace plans, mostly ones that didn't work, as have I, and Nimrod and Marwan as well, on this issue. How do you see it all conceptually, practically?
I think it's a good starting point. End of the day, this is a political conflict that requires a political solution. So we can discuss governance, we can discuss security, we can discuss economy, we can discuss humanitarian issues, but if we don't come up with a political framework, it's going to be difficult to move forward. I was listening to a Palestinian commentator last week who was asked this question: do you think we're going to move into phase two? And he said, considering that we're still in phase one of the Oslo Accords after so many years, I am not that optimistic. I'm choosing to be more optimistic. I think there is a U.S. commitment to doing that. The CMCC is, this is major U.S. involvement. We have the big guns out, so to speak, which means things can change, things can improve. And of course, first and foremost, stopping the fighting, saving people's lives in Gaza, providing humanitarian aid, that's a good start. Of course, the release of the hostages, the release of prisoners. So it's a good starting point, but we need to we need to have more dialogue, more Palestinian voices need to be heard, more discussion of the details on moving forward. I think it's a good starting point.
Yeah, Manal, I'm buoyed by your optimism, but I'm reminded that one of our finest American writers, William Faulkner, wrote in Requiem for a Nun that the past is never over. It's never even past. And I think your reference to Oslo is a cautionary tale here. With that, let me turn to Nimrod Novick. Nim, how do you see this?
Well, my initial reaction to the 20 points was that I was looking at a Twitter or Truth Social version of the Biden plan. What was developed over all of 2024 and a little earlier by the Biden administration, especially Secretary of State Blinken, was a fairly healthy document with great details on how to bring about a morning after cessation of hostilities and morning after in Gaza. And suddenly you saw a typical Trump-like version of the same. I didn't find many elements in the 20 points that were not detailed and thoroughly thought through in the Biden one, or vice versa. I didn't find anything really missing. With time, I came to realize that even in the Biden plan and now in the 20 points, much thought was given to phase one. Some thought was given to phase two, and no thought was given to the transition between them. The assumption that the success of phase one will create so much momentum as to drive everything into phase two was an illusion, proven to be an illusion. With time, also, the internal contradictions within the 20 points, from time to time, reality steps in, and principles prove to be to fall short. The flaws in the concept are now beginning not only to emerge but to be addressed.
Yeah.
Will they be addressed successfully? I have no idea. We'll see.
Right. So, Nimrod, you raised an interesting point by referring to the Biden administration. I don't want to get ahead of myself and ourselves in the conversation, but there's one reality here that separates the Biden administration's view of this problem from the Trump administration. And it is embodied in the view and the persona of an American president. I offer you my own editorial opinion on this, having worked and voted for Republicans and Democrats. No president I ever worked for, and I would add Obama and Biden to the mix there. You have to go back to Eisenhower to identify a president that was willing to talk to an Israeli prime minister in the way that Donald Trump has been willing to talk to, get around opening up a dialogue with Hamas directly, cutting a deal with the Houthis about which the Israelis learned after the fact. I mean, there's so many examples. Removing sanctions on the Ahmed Shara government over the objections of the current Israeli government. This is all, frankly, unheard of on the American side. And that may well be the flaw and the greatest asset and liability in this plan. But we're going to get to this in a minute. I want to come back to you, Manal, on the issue of Palestinian reaction. I mean, it's a heavy assignment I've given you. It's not one reaction. You have the Palestinian Authority, you have Hamas, you have the 15-person technocratic committee that is yet to be announced. You have the publics on the West Bank and Gaza. So give me your sense, if you could break it down for us. How do the various, you raised it's a political issue, it is indeed, or Hamas and the PA reacting to this?
I mean, the PA has welcomed the plan very publicly. They made clear they're willing to cooperate. They just would like to be more involved as far as discussion as the details. And they would like to be they're more focused on issues of governance. And they think that, it is, they still function within the Oslo framework. And according to that, they want to expand their governance or to integrate PA into and governance in Gaza into the PA. Hamas is different. Hamas, I mean, they signed the ceasefire deal, or they agreed to the ceasefire deal, and now, which to a certain extent it implied that they're going to disarm, And now they're saying that they're not going to disarm. For Palestinians in general, many of them see phase one as basically the agreement. They it was about the release of hostages. But end of the day, when it comes to stopping the fighting, saving lives, and giving some hope to the people in Gaza, I think Palestinians agree that okay, it's good. At least the fighting has stopped. Let's see what we can do next.
Right. So I have two questions for you. Both relate to Hamas. The first is on the issue of why did the internal leadership, external leadership, may be different, and the interaction between the two was sort of a mystery to me. But why was Hamas convinced ultimately, presumably by the Qataris, the Turks, the Egyptians, and perhaps by the Americans, to give up what they believed to be their greatest asset, that is to say, freeing the hostages in response for an asymmetrical number of Palestinian prisoners from the Israelis? Why did they agree to this?
I don't have insider information from Hamas's side, but I think the impression is that the hostages had become a liability, and Hamas is aiming to survive. For them, victory is basically the survival of their organization and their control in Gaza. So I think just the hostages issue became a liability for Hamas, and they wanted to actually, get that out of the way. And now, of course, they're going to cling to the arms and refuse to disarm, and that's their other card that they can leverage.
Right. The move from asset to liability in terms of the hostages. I mean, you can see now that Hamas is now able, in releasing hostages, two things have happened. The war, as we've watched it, is ended. As far as Donald Trump is concerned, it is over. We are not going back to what we saw for the last 2.5 years. Trump has made this unmistakably clear to Netanyahu, and Hamas doesn't want that because it's expanding its control, presumably, in the 47% of Gaza that it now occupies. I mean, what is its calculations? Well, someone said to me that the leadership is now caught between the dawah, the social religious outreach on one hand, and the mukawama, the resistance on the other. Do you see any prospects of change in Hamas's strategy, and who's making decisions?
I mean, if you follow the rhetoric, they're talking about state within the 1967 borders. They're talking about joining the PLO. They're talking about a political horizon, which goes against everything that Hamas has worked for and worked against in the past 30 years. I think they're aiming for their survival. They're aiming for a role in the day after. There are major internal divisions inside Hamas, as far as we can tell, but some of them are very clear cut, that if you really think about it, they're trying to possibly transform into some sort of a political entity, or at least, try to transform in that direction. I think it's Hamas. This is a fight for survival of Hamas.
Right.
And
my
concern,
we'll get back to the issue of how they look at decommissioning, demilitarization in a bit. But Nimrod, let me turn to you now. The Israeli government's reaction to this, if you can comment, you're involved with Commanders CIS, Israeli security. How is the Netanyahu government approaching this? The intelligence, security establishment. What about the Israeli public?
As far as the government or Netanyahu-dominated government, Netanyahu from the outset was the rope in the tug of war with Trump on the one end and the lunatics in his coalition on the other, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and the likes. His primary objective since his indictment is to find a way to end his trial before it reaches its logical conclusion, which is prison time. And for that, he has to remain prime minister. And with those extreme elements of his coalition threatening to jump ship and bring him down, if he goes for any concession to the Palestinians, certainly Palestinian Authority, but even in Gaza, he had to play very carefully between his fear of Trump and his fear of these fellows. And I think that thus far he has proven quite astute at accommodating both. I think that the 29th of December, when he meets Trump in Mar-a-Lago, is going to be a very interesting moment that will determine much of what we want to talk about in 26. But for now, he managed to prevent them from jumping ship and yet accommodate the president, even on things that are unthinkable for those like point 19 of the 20 that promise Palestinians in some convoluted language statehood and self-determination. The Israeli defense establishment is presently in a mood, if we don't do it, nobody else will. And do it mean disarm Hamas. They don't believe that ISF will be formed, and if it is formed, will be deployed into the half of Gaza controlled by Hamas. And if it is deployed, will fight Hamas in order to overcome resistance to disarmament. And therefore, the mood there is code word for we're ready to continue fighting. The Israeli public is not there at all. The Israeli public has long been against the war, wanted it to end a year and more before it did, didn't see the logic of it since the moment that the IDF reported that all Hamas military formations have been dismantled. And the rest was chasing Hamas operatives, and that can go on for decades. So the public is against continuing or resuming the fighting. The IDF is afraid that it may not be possible not to. And the prime minister thrives on a perpetual conflict. He needs it. He trumpets tactical successes as strategic achievements. And he is preaching perpetual conflict. We may get to it or not, but that's true in Syria, Lebanon, as well as Gaza.
Yeah.
In what I would call is creeping escalation. Escalating without crossing thresholds that bring the Americans or others to intervene too seriously.
Right. Before I turn to Marwan for Arab state and Muslim reaction, one question. Doesn't Benjamin Netanyahu, when it comes to Donald Trump, have any red lines at all? Is there any issue that Netanyahu would be willing to stand up and say to the president, not just no, but hell no?
I would say, I don't think that there is on the agenda of the president, there are issues that will trigger that. But I think that the president misled Netanyahu in March when he allowed the prime minister to violate the ceasefire that bore the president's name on it. And he reinforced Netanyahu's traditional assumption that he can play any American president, including this one. I think it took only September 9th, the Israeli strike at Doha, to convince the president that Netanyahu didn't really hear him well. And since then, I think that, a last comment on this one. Once we entered an election year, and we have, and all assumption is that elections will be ahead of the schedule of October, I think that Netanyahu is very, very worried that Trump can undo his residual prospects in one tweet that says, I've had enough of this guy, or, as he already indicated when he was in the Knesset, when he said, well, I can work with the other guy as well, Yair Lapid.
Given the fact that he's more popular in Israel than Netanyahu, it is a great concern. Marwan, now to you. The Arab world, or at least we can do it country by country, but give a sense The Arab factor, Marwan, seems to now be much more consequential than at any point that I can remember in negotiations. The so-called Arab collective, if there is such a thing, in making its views known. Nimrod mentioned the attack on Doha. That may have been a wake-up call for the Saudis and the Qataris. But give us your sense, maybe starting with Jordan, since it's one of two Israel's treaty partners.
Well, first, there is no collective Arab world, as you said, Aaron. It's very difficult to talk about a unified Arab position. But I will talk to you about Jordan's position. And in that, I would lump in also Saudi Arabia and Egypt at least. And their position combined is that the Trump plan is the only game in town. We better support it, not because we think it's a great plan, not because we think it might go beyond phase one, but because it will result, and it has resulted, in a ceasefire. And so it is, it is better to engage with it than not. That's basically the position. Beyond that, Jordan is still extremely concerned that the war is not over, that maybe the Gaza, war or ceasefire is holding, but there's another sort of hidden war going on in the West Bank, where the West Bank is being annexed, very gradually, with the active support of the settlers, with the support of the IDF behind them, with a judicial system that does not provide any accountability for the more than 1,000, Palestinians killed since October 7 in the West Bank. That is Jordan's main concern. And it doesn't see anything being seriously done about it. There's no aerial bombardment, there's no starvation, there's no activity that would stir international public opinion about this, but it is going on nonetheless. What these countries are, I believe, thinking of doing, again, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, is trying to come up with a plan to present to Trump that is credible, that is doable, because there is no plan, as we have all, I think, agreed on. And I think it's the Arab, at least these countries' responsibilities to come up with something credible, to move beyond phase two. So far, you are right, Aaron, that the president has maybe stood up to the Israeli prime minister more than any other, maybe, president in history. But it is all about tactical issues. The president has not said, you're going to come to negotiations over a two-state solution. The president has not said, you are going to stop annexation, period. He has not done any of that. And while the president himself is not ideological, Trump, and wants to work out deals, he is still surrounded by very ideological people, starting from the U.S. ambassador in Tel Aviv, who, day and night sort of implies, if not openly says, that there is no two-state solution, that the United States does not support necessarily a two-state solution, etc. That's what the Arab world is concerned about. That the other concern, if I may also, is countries like Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia don't want to put in or to join forces to keep the peace in Gaza that might end up with them confronting Hamas. I mean, that's a formula that just doesn't work. Jordan has for long been opposed to such a peacemaking force rather than a peacekeeping force. And so again, to Nimrod's question, yes, who is going to be in that force? Is it the Indonesians? Is it the Turks? All of these people are going to find it very reluctant to confront Hamas in any way, shape, or form. It will not endear them to the Muslim world if they do that. And so, again, I have my concerns that there will be any serious, ISF force coming out. But for now, if we don't want to go too far ahead, for now, I believe there are efforts by these countries, as I said, to come up with something to present to Trump and try to fill the gaps that are already there. Certainly, Israel, in my view, is not going to present a plan beyond disarming Hamas. But Arab countries have, are looking further ahead for a political horizon beyond the war on Gaza. So far, they have not followed that with any sort of detailed plan on how to move even beyond phase 2.
Yeah. I mean, if Gaza first becomes Gaza only, which is one of the risks and implications of the current strategy. And, there's no evidence. I mean, no one could argue your case, the theory of the case, Marwan. There's not a shred of critical empirical data, even though Mike Huckabee is sitting down or sat down with Hussein al-Sheikh either yesterday or is going to sit down with them. That's somewhat of a first. And, the reality is we've had American Jews as ambassadors to Israel, many. This is the first evangelical Christian that represents a substantial part of the American political community.
I think we're all rooting for American Jews coming back again.
Maybe even the evangelical community may be more united on this question than the current state of the almost 6 million American Jews. Nimrod, I saw a finger go up. If it's compelling, please, sally forth.
I wanted to suggest a slightly different take on the Arab role in this whole thing. And I would point out at least 3 benchmarks. January 25, when Trump imposed the ceasefire. March, I'll go them one by one. On each one of these occasions, 3, March and then July, that led to the 20 points. On each of these occasions, something unusual happened, and that was the Arabs presented a 4-element strategy, which I'm not sure that they articulate. I think it was intuitive, but it worked. And what was it? They presented a united front. In January, they will deliver Hamas if Trump delivers Bibi on ceasefire. They presented an actionable plan. They presented a commitment that they will do much of the heavy lifting. And they presented a message, we will do the work, you will get the credit. Those 4 elements produced the ceasefire in January. They produced the plan in March. The Arab League embraced the Egyptian plan for reconstruction of Gaza that Trump scared them into doing by suggesting the Gaza Riviera nonsense, and then went along with their plan. And the last time was, of course, with the 20-point plan post September 9th, Israel's assault on Doha. If today they do the same thing, come up with a united front, an actionable plan, a commitment to do the heavy lifting, and the credit will go to the president, they might be able not to wait out the results of December 29, but rather shape them.
Nimrod, if I can jump in, Aaron.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask you.
That's exactly the point. If the United States is able to deliver Bibi, that is the question. Look at what is happening in South Lebanon. The Lebanese government keeps saying, we are ready to disarm Hezbollah. We are doing it south of the Litani. But we need the Israelis to withdraw from these 5 unimportant, points that they still hold on in South Lebanon. And the Americans have not been able to deliver Bibi even on these 5 points. And so for the more difficult issue of disarming Hamas, how are Arab states going to do it in the absence of serious pressure from the US president on Bibi? That kind of serious pressure we have not seen yet.
Yeah,
my only point was that if you want Trump to put pressure on Netanyahu, I think the way to get there is by tempting him by a win. And those who can tempt him is the Arabs when they come united with a plan and a commitment to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah. Manal?
As far as pressure, honestly, I was very surprised, and that I did not feel the usual Israeli pushback when it came to the UN Security Council resolution, because we're used to the Israelis pushing hard on any type of internationalization. So that, to me, that showed a sign of US pressure that was effective in a way. And that was, I mean, Israel usually pushed back very heavily against any type of setting a precedent of internationalizing part of the conflict, because that would open the possibility of people trying to expand it. You know, for example, there are discussions among Palestinians of, okay, if they're going to have a stabilization force in Gaza, why not expand its mandate to some areas in the West Bank where there's settler violence and settler terror? So that was a sign of US pressure that actually delivered. The other thing that the US administration can actually do, which is something that I've heard Nimrod talk about before, and he's a master at coming up with specific workable recommendations, is that next year is an election year. It's a pivotal year in Israel. And there's so much potential with what Saudi has been doing, with, of course, with other partners from France, from Jordan, Egypt. Everybody's been doing a great job. They preserved the possibility, and they kept the political dimension. They preserved the political dimension of this entire discussion and this entire conflict, and that's the only way to resolve it. The more we lean into the political dimension, the more the conflict is closer to being resolved. So there's great potential if the Saudis can deliver and partners can deliver the Palestinians, if the US administration is able to deliver the Israelis. And I think making the case to the Israeli public in an election year of what's at stake, what's on offer, and it's a great opportunity to set the stage for healthy, viable political separation, to set the stage for regional integration. There's so much on offer, so much at stake. I think we can have some progress and positive movement forward.
Yeah, you know, you all indirectly or directly point to Trump as the key ingredient in all of this. And our colleagues, Marwan, Amr Hamzawi, and Nathan Brun have just written a very interesting piece about, is there something called a sort of unified Arab pressure point that can be marshaled in pursuit of this? I think what you're all saying is that, all of you, is that you need a strategy, which would mean a fundamental relationship between the means that this American president has at its disposal and the objectives, feasible, realistic objectives that can be achieved. I don't know, a year in watching Trump during Trump 1.0, whether or not he thinks strategically. He thinks transactionally and situationally. He wants to end the fighting in Gaza, maybe not the war. Initially, he'd want to end the fighting in Ukraine, but not the war. That has now evolved into something much more comprehensive and much broader. He's added the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to the other 7 conflicts that he's resolved in the world, when in fact,
he does,
none of them are resolved.
Aaron, but he does want something else.
A Nobel Peace Prize?
Yes, that too. He wants Saudi Arabia to sign an Abrahamic Accord type of an agreement with Israel. And the Saudis have made it clear, both to the Biden administration and certainly since October 7th, that they are not going to sign an Abrahamic Accord type of an agreement that does not involve what they call a credible pathway towards a Palestinian state. Now, you can parse what that means, okay? It does not mean, in my view, that this is a precondition for signing a peace agreement, but it does mean that some serious progress has to be made on the Palestinian front before they are able to sign an agreement. And of course, that serious progress, I think we all agree, is not in the making right now.
No.
And so, the possibility of Saudi Arabia signing any type of a normalization agreement with Israel at this stage seems remote. That is something that the Saudis can speak to if they want, very candidly with the president. But what the Saudis have done is that they have separated the two issues, the issue of peace with Israel from the issue of wanting to have strong economic and security ties with the United States. Biden made that a condition. He was ready to give them that in return for a normalization agreement. Today, Trump has accepted that separation. But if there is one Arab country, that the United States might listen to, okay, not agree with necessarily, but might listen to in Washington these days, it is the Saudis. And so what the Saudis do with Washington, I think, is going to be very important.
Right. But this is not your normal Saudi king. Saudis have had 7 kings, including King Salman. The average tenure of a Saudi king, I did the math, is 13 years. Abdulaziz ruled the second longest, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia. This guy, Mohammed bin Salman, aka MBS, will rule Saudi Arabia when he becomes king for half a century. He is pursuing a 360-degree foreign policy. Russia, China, yes, he wants closer relations, and he's getting it, Marwan. He's including the promise of F-35s without normalizing and without a Senate ratification, which would prevent the next administration from walking away from any sort of deal. My question to you, and I want to revert back to Gaza and then move to the broader theme of Israeli-Palestinian peace. Can you even start the conversation about the broader Israeli-Palestinian pathway if Gaza remains what it is likely to remain in 2026, which is 2 Gazas, some measure of International Stabilization Force deployment into areas controlled by the state of Israel, because that's what's coming. There's no decommissioning of Hamas. It took the Irish. Decommissioning started in 1998. It didn't conclude until 2005. And the IRA was offered power sharing. Hamas knows that decommissioning is the end of its road. It's gone as a unique factor, or at least that's probably its fear. Can you move to a broader discussion of Israeli-Palestinian peace? With Gaza being the way it is, divided into 2, with a long-suffering, destitute Palestinian population, with the Israelis preserving the right to preempt and prevent, with no demilitarization, with an Israeli government still living in the shadow of October 7th? Or do you need to go to the broader frame quickly to get an agreement, a vision, a political horizon? Because you can't do Gaza first. You can't do Gaza at all without a broader.
You can't. And I would add to everything you said, the reconstruction of Gaza, Aaron. Who is going to reconstruct Gaza?
Agreed.
Nobody. I mean, the Gulf states have privately stated time and again that they are not interested, that Saudi Arabia's focus is internal now. The United States is not going to do it. The European Union is bankrupt. Nobody is there to reconstruct Gaza. You are going to see humanitarian assistance for sure. But beyond humanitarian assistance, any talk about reconstructing Gaza, I think, is not serious. And do you expect Israeli government, do you expect Bibi in an election year to start talking about a broader agreement, to start talking about a solution, a 2-state solution, when a majority of the Israeli public today is against it? It's not going to happen.
Right.
At least anytime soon.
Agreed. So let's spend our remaining time getting each of you, Marwan, I know where you are on this one, but I want you to articulate it because it's hard for me to, I will argue with you about this, but neither of us can predict the future. But I want to start with Nimrod. Since Manal raised the issue, this is a political problem. It certainly is. And it was Henry Kissinger who once quipped that Israel had no foreign policy, just domestic politics. So, Nimrod, let's start the conversation. We have 15 minutes. Let's start the conversation about how you think, what sort of politics are we looking at, Nimrod, in 2026?
I challenge two premises of what you and Marwan have just discussed. One premise is on strategy, and the other one about Israeli politics. And I will attribute to you something you didn't say. So please, it's okay.
People do it
on strategy.
Okay.
On strategy, I think Aaron and all of us have been strategizing for decades to the point that I think that we neglect the possibility that good things can happen incrementally, without a grand vision. Incrementally. Something comes up on Trump's table, and he doesn't like it. He picks up the phone, and he tells Netanyahu, stop it. It's over. We're going to go to do something else. And constructive things can happen incrementally. Second is about Israeli politics. First, I don't think that we should look at the next year as a Netanyahu year. We may be in elections in April, we may be in May, we may be in June. The next government is not going to be a bunch of, assuming the next government is the one that is being suggested by the polls over the last 2 years consistently, which is primarily the current opposition. It's not going to be a bunch of peaceniks who are going to run to Ramallah to hug Abu Mazen and sign a peace treaty. However, they will change policy in very dramatic ways. First, for them, Gaza war will be over, unlike Netanyahu, who needs it to continue. For them, the Palestinian Authority will not be an enemy, but rather a suspected partner that should be given some space to evolve and to deliver services for its own people. For them, settler violence will not be an instrument of policy, but rather a crime to be arrested. So I think we're going to see major changes from the slide towards the horrible scenario that Marwan suggested rightfully that Jordan is concerned with, even though the two-state solution will remain over the horizon. I think that we are also a bit too definitive in our pessimism about disarming Hamas. I would call your attention to indications that the Egyptians have already worked with Hamas, with more than one faction within Hamas and the other factions, a formula that can make disarmament a reality. However, as you, Aaron, so rightfully pointed out, the administration erred in creating unrealistic expectations about disarming Hezbollah by end of year and Hamas overnight. These are processes, they are gradual, and they need reinforcement. And Hamas needs justification for its own needs, face-saving formulas. And the Egyptians have worked out with Hamas a three-phase approach that looks voluntary, that under tremendous pressure from Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, Hamas voluntarily lays down its heavy weapons. They are stored. They are controlled by so-called Palestinian Arab, which means Egypt, in storage in Gaza, and eventually exported to Egypt, never to come back. But even for that simple three-phase disarmament, the environment has to be prepped, and that includes Israeli withdrawals, and that includes a lot of other things like early reconstruction, however symbolic. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility that if what Trump should do on the 29th of December, that we are not going to see an opening for a slightly more optimistic scenario in Gaza as well.
Right. I would just look at the timeline here. You need 3 months, whether it's according to Israeli election law or not. You'd end up with elections, let's say, earliest by May or June.
No, it can be earlier.
You think it could be earlier?
It can. I don't want to go into all the
No, it's fine.
intricacies.
Neither do
but
I.
yeah,
But
it can be. It can be March, April. It
you
can
kept-
be.
You kept referring to them. For them, it's going to be different. For them, it's going to be different. There's got to be a he. If there were a she, that would be terrific too. But there has to be a he, Nimrod. And who is the most likely he to head a new Israeli government?
You're not going to have another prime minister in the next 4 years who will be as dominant as Netanyahu. Nobody comes close.
That's correct. You could
And
get
therefore, it's going to be a coalition. It's going to be a coalition.
Okay, since none of us can predict the future, I hope on this one that's correct, and it's headed by someone who will follow the policies that you suggest. Where are the two of you, Manal and Marwan, on the issue of this broader frame? I think, Marwan, you've made your views pretty clear. 2 states along the lines we were negotiating in Camp David 25 years ago, with border security, refugees, Jerusalem being definitively and comprehensively resolved, is not now a basis. 1967 borders with swaps of equal size and value, a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, 2/4 of the old city being turned over to Palestinian sovereignty, the Haram HaSharif, Har HaBayit, being put on some sort of shared sovereignty or an international committee governance. None of that strikes me in the shadow of October 7 and the dysfunction in the Palestinian national movement as to be realistic. Unless you disagree, Marwan and Manal.
No, I don't disagree. My views are, and I think the window has closed on a two-state solution long before October 7th.
Along the lines I describe it?
Along the lines you described it.
Or no separation through negotiations. None.
How do you separate 750,000 settlers in the West Bank and Gaza? How do you bring a political will?
You don't have to do that. I mean,
Nimrod, I was going to give you
you're opening so many Pandora boxes.
I'm sorry.
Well, I'm not opening Pandora's boxes, Nimrod. I just finished.
No, but if you have a swap of 4.5%, then you have a problem with
Nimrod,
160 and not 700.
Is there a political will to do it?
No.
Okay. So what are we talking
different.
about?
That's different.
What are we talking about?
Impossible is one thing. No political will can change.
I just finished reading a book by Hussein Agha and Rob Malley. And Rob Malley was a member of the U.S. negotiating team, Aaron, in Camp David, that talked about all the things that you talked about. And, they too have given up on a two-state solution.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, my own view is that there is no short-term solution to the conflict. I don't see this as a definitive, prediction. I see it after decades of working on two states. I just don't think it is possible. I don't think there is a short-term solution. I think we have been, tirelessly working for one, but the reality is different. And my own view is that we might be moving again in the long term towards maybe a federal arrangement, a Palestinian-Israeli federal arrangement in which the two sides can exercise their right to self-determination, their right to their culture, to their language, etc., but within the framework of one state, much like what the Swiss Federation is like today or the Belgian Federation is like. You say that this is utopic. No, I think the two-state solution has become utopic.
Right. The two-state solution along the lines we negotiated it.
Yes.
Maybe. Although leadership could change a lot, frankly. Manal?
I just choose to refer to the process as a healthy, viable political separation, which I feel is in the interest of both sides and the international community. If we decide a destination, which was the main pitfall and failure of Oslo, it did not decide a goal or a destination. We can start working out the details, but there needs to be a destination in order to mobilize the population, in order to convince people. And we start working out the details of how this is going to go. And an arrangement that will fulfill the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. I think the political separation will addresses the Israeli concerns or the Israeli aspirations. So I just would start with the broader frame, is that let's decide on a destination. We have on offer a regional and an international offer that, still revolves around the Oslo framework, which you've negotiated a long time ago. Combined with US pressure, I think both of these, with the coalition on the preservation of the two-state solution and the implementation of the two-state solution, with US pressure and engagement with the Israeli public, I think we can develop a new framework that address that. We need, this is different than Oslo in that Saudi and regional involvement will actually address the asymmetry in power. It will help with compliance because, Israel respects its agreements with Jordan. Israel respects its agreements with Egypt, but, with the Palestinian Authority, non-state actor, it's been difficult. So I think that will address the imbalance in power, that will ensure more compliance. There's so many elements, and of course, integration is on offer within the region, economic incentives. So I think if we decide on the destination, we can start a dialogue on the details and the specific details.
Nimrod,
I'm trying to be optimistic as much as possible because you guys depressed me.
Right. Yeah, I know. That's the risk of having these conversations, is Marwan and Nimrod I know well. Nimrod, you're not going to have the last word, but I'll turn to you now.
My premise is on two legs. One is we were not an easy people before October 7th, and we became harder in the wake of October 7th. I believe the same is true on the Palestinian side in the wake, not of necessarily of October 7th, but 2-year war, horrific war in Gaza. Positions have hardened on both sides. And therefore, a two-state solution or any kind of formula is not on this side of the horizon. My second leg is that in my judgment, and here's where I take issue with the Confederation approach, these two peoples are not going to live happily ever after under one roof. 7.5 million Jews and 7.5 million Palestinians between the Jordan and the sea are going to fight each other, bleed each other until they separate. So either we separate because of a major bloodbath, and then we come to our senses to a two-state of this sort or another, or we are lucky, as you noted, Aaron, or we are lucky and we get separation before the bloodbath because leadership will emerge on both sides, willing and able to make it happen.
Right. I would only say, Nimrod, that from my experience, successful negotiations require urgency. And urgency is driven by two factors and two factors only. One is pain. When the costs of the status quo remain so alarming and prohibitive that both sides need to make a change. But pain alone, as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has demonstrated for decades, is not enough. Pain needs to be complemented by gain. The prospects of giving up means getting something. And the pain and gain balance right now in a galaxy far, far away should have been enough in the wake of October 7 to move leaders. But we don't live in a galaxy far, far away. We live with the realities on planet Earth. And I would only conclude by saying it is leadership that is required. Leaders who are masters of their politics, not prisoners of them and their ideologies, and leaders who are prepared to make space in their own national narrative for the so-called other. We've had such leaders in the past. There's a chilling line from the movie Nuremberg at the end, which appears on the screen. The only clue to what humans can do is what they have done. And I would say to you, you could interpret that line and say it's ultimately going to end in horror, or you could argue we've had leaders in the past and we can have them again. I'd conclude by just one more note. I was in Jerusalem on October 6th, 1973. That's a very long time ago. Until October 7, 2023, that was the greatest trauma and intelligence failure that the state of Israel had experienced. And yet, within 6 years of that, I watched on the White House lawn Begin, Sadat, and Carter sign a full treaty of peace. I'm not comparing the two situations. Israeli-Palestinian lift is so much harder. But leadership is critical. First, I want to thank the four of you for being here. I mean, I leave optimistic. Manal, you've buoyed my spirits, I have to say. The four of you, seeing the four of you together,
Three.
Complimenting, arguing with one another, that reminds me of the good old days, and they can come back again. So I want to thank all of you for your commitment, your dedication, because I know in the end, you really all do want the same thing, and for your experience and your wisdom. And for Carnegie Connects listeners and viewers, I wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year. If I missed a holiday, I apologize. Stay tuned for some really terrific interviews in 2026. And again, Marwan, Manal, and Nimrod, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
And take good care.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.